March 7th, 2011. The Federal Bureau of Investigation came across an abandoned shack in the countryside of Florida and happened upon something strange. A journal written by one Jake Rogers, a mysterious person deemed missing and whereabouts unknown. August 3rd, 2012. This journal has been documented by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and has been deemed classified by the government to not be shared until a specified date. All information is a journal by one Jake Rogers, a now retired doctor whose whereabouts continue to go unknown despite heavy searching. January 6th, 2014. Further attempts to locate and question Jake Rogers have ended in failure. It seems he and his companions refuse to show themselves and continue to move around, evading authorities at all costs. Report added to databanks. November 11th, 2015. Journal of a one Jake Rogers has been deemed unclassified and can now be found in public documents. Viewers be advised, what you are about to read is disturbing. Journal entry 1. Vacation begins. Strange disappearances.
Long trips had always been fun to us. We worked rather draining jobs, so when we decided on our next vacation, we were excited about it. I and my wife had originally planned a trip to one of the more common beaches in the Bahamas or Florida, but we decided on a much more secluded place to be away from the masses. We're both a bit on the antisocial side. Public resorts and beaches tend to give us anxiety. We were content as we got the trip for an exceptionally good deal. We planned to leave sometime during July before it got too hot in August, but some issues with the family cropped up and we had to reschedule by a week. This was annoying but manageable, as we were planning to be gone at least 2 months. At first, we were worried we wouldn't have a view of the water, but soon we learned that the place recently got renovated and had a brand new inn made for people seeking the more eye-candy getaways. This was the main reason we chose this place. Because of where I and my wife lived, we had to take a flight there. It was cheaper than driving the entire distance, as gas prices here easily skyrocket to stupid levels, and is despised by our family with the most white-hot of passions. Before leaving, we left our 2 kids with their grandparents and told them when we'd be back, saying our goodbyes, as our kids had puppy eyes begging us not to leave. Now, I wish we had listened to them, for I fear we will never get to see them or our kin again. The journey to the airport itself was the most stressful part of the trip, as going through customs always ends with people thinking I was a damn suicide bomber or something. I'm sure most people wouldn't know what I mean, but you always have to be scanned for metallic objects and dangerous chemicals before you can even board the plane itself, which can also take forever, especially if the airport is crowded. Unfortunately, we were packed so tight, there was barely a foot between us all. A good 30 minutes passed, and we were finally allowed to board our plane. For those of you who are unaware, this is a private 3-man plane which consists of me, my wife, and the pilot, so you can guess it isn't that big. It's just big enough to fit us and our carriage in the storage compartment in the back. A private plane is always a better option, but of course, he only charged $250 for the trip to the airport near our location of interest. While on the way, we decided to chat a little bit to pass the time. The pilot asked, "So, where are you lovely folks off to?" To which I responded in kind. "We work stressful jobs, so we have planned a 2-month trip to a secluded beach." I replied, to which my wife said, "Indeed, we got it for a fair price too, didn't we, hon?" She said with a cute accent, to which I spoke, "Indeed we did. I'm very grateful to whom gave us this location." I replied back, as the pilot exclaimed, "I hope you two have a lovely time. You'll likely see me again in 2 months to take you back," he said cheerfully, as I replied, "Thanks, we appreciate it." The rest of the trip was silent, with me and my wife on Facebook, talking to our family while on the flight. For some context, my wife was a nurse and I was a doctor. We both made a very hefty sum of $335,000 a year combined because of our field of work, which enabled us to live very comfortably with our small family, and we never went overboard with houses or vehicles. But we had state-of-the-art phones that could maintain a long battery charge and a hefty internet connection to boot. They were good. Around 3 hours of flight, the pilot notified us we were close to our landing zone. 30 minutes later, we were already down, unpacked, and on our way to a transit bus waiting to pick us up that we scheduled during the payment process. It came with the trip since the inn owned its own small transit section for buses to pick people up. They're small, but they get the job done. Fast and easy, just how we prefer it. From there on, it was very simple to pack up our stuff on the bus and make our way to Sebastian Inlet. While on the way to our destination, the surrounding thick brush and dark green trees provided very pleasant eye candy. It was very beautiful, and since it was a breezy day, the trees, thickets, and brush waved harmoniously in the breeze. Once arriving at the inn, we parked at Sector 24. To explain what that is, the inn has 25 reserved spots at maximum for long-term reserve vacations, as the inn only sports 25 rooms, a large dining room, and a beautiful mounted deck out back to climb up to. The deck itself sports lounging chairs, umbrellas, the ability to order drinks and small snacks, as well as a plate load of activities ranging from massages to mini games to dartboards. Inside the inn is where the majority of the fun happens, serving up rare and exotic dishes from all around the world, with many talented cooks and waitresses. Our first day was precise as most would expect. We sat down, had a meal or two, and indulged in some of the delicious, exotic desserts they had to offer us. Unfortunately, we weren't able to spend much time in the inn dining area on the first day, as we had spent most of the day traveling, and we were frankly too tired. We decided the next thing we could do before heading back to our room is play a few mini games, like beanbag toss for example. I and my wife were up against another couple, and we scored top by beating the opposing couple by a good 23-12. Back home, we love playing this game as a pastime, so we're both very adept at it. It was 8:30 when everyone decided to turn in, so I and my wife followed suit. A waiter stopped us and told us that our room was room 24, the same corresponding number as our parking spot outside. I thanked the waiter for letting us know, as we were really tired and ready to turn in. I wrapped my arm around my wife, and we both walked casually down the aisle, sharing our opinions on the trip thus far. We knew after the first day it was going to be awesome, but we'd soon learn we were very wrong. How could we have been so blind? It was obvious by the low payments on this trip that something would go wrong. No use in bickering over it now. Not 2 days after arriving at our vacation spot in Sebastian Inlet, Florida, we started to notice some strange happenings. It was very apparent by the circumstances that were unfolding right before our very eyes. We grew nervous, unable to focus, and even worse still, we felt so isolated, so disconnected from the world we had left behind. Around 5 hours after falling asleep, roughly 2 a.m., we noticed some strange noises coming from way down the hall. It was muffled, to say the least. We didn't think much of it, of course, after all. Most couples come here to get away, but also to have a little fun without their kids around to hear or intervene. It felt like 10 minutes or so, and the sounds finally stopped. Before long, we were back asleep, not thinking much of it, of course. The next morning, we decided to head out for coffee. The morning sun peeled through the blinds in our bedroom window. I rose out of bed, greeting the new day with a fresh smile, and decided to let my wife sleep for a bit longer. She deserved it, given how hard she works. I left her a note telling her I went to get some coffee for us both. Upon leaving the dorm room, I hooked a right turn and made my way back down the aisle we had traveled down the night before. The rooms were numbered from 1 to 25. The last room, 25, is the one to our left. Room 25 was empty, as no one had supposedly taken up that spot in the inn. It didn't cross my mind once more after that. As I made my way down the aisle, I noticed room 1 at the very end was vacant. This wasn't right. I knew there was someone in that room last night. Where could they have gone? I pondered on it, and concluded that perhaps they only registered one night and were locals. I continued to the dining room to grab some coffee. It was free with the trip, mind you. After that, I made my way down the aisle again, back to my dorm room. By the time I made it back, she was awake, washing her face with warm water. I could never get over how gorgeous she was, even without makeup. Her long, black hair dangling over her shoulders, and those deep blue eyes. I then had the idea to document the entire trip in a small journal I happened to bring along with us. I was uncertain it would have any use. Now, of course, I'm glad I decided to bring it with us. I walked over to my wife, handed her the cup of coffee I got for her, and sipped on mine. "How'd you sleep, love?" she asked. "I slept alright, hon. What about you?" I replied, to which she responded, "That's good. Did you notice anything last night? Any sounds?" She said lowly, "Yeah, the people in room 1 decided to vacate last night," I responded. She nodded in understanding, and we took it off our minds. The rest of the day we continued as normal, enjoying the delights of the inn. We were finally allowed to go back on the beach since our schedule was now cleaned up, and ready for a long 2-month relaxation of no responsibilities. As adults, being rich enough to enjoy freedom like this now and then is a very good blessing. However, we've always been considerate of others in life, helping when and wherever we could. Not everyone is blessed with being able to go on trips like us, and we try our best to be as humble as possible to those around us. We even live in a basic home. The beach was clean, warm, and relaxing. We spent a good 4 or so hours out there doing typical stuff, such as sunbathing, walking up and down the beach with fingers interlocked together, swimming in the low tides, sitting under an umbrella and drinking a beer or two. But after that, we decided to head back inside and spend the rest of the day doing exactly what we did before, talking to the nice folds around, enjoying a good meal and some mini games, and dancing the day away in bliss. By the time 10 p.m. rolled around, I told my wife I was tired, and she was as well. We said goodbye to the others in our group and got up, making our way slowly down the corridor once again to our room. As we passed by room 1, I gave it a curious stare and wondered why they'd leave so soon. A place like this is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for most people who can afford it. As we passed, I shook my head and continued, holding my wife close to me as we slid slowly down the aisle, eyes very heavy. We were soon dead asleep, and before long, we heard everyone else following suit, returning to their respective dorm rooms. All was good until 2 a.m., yet again, shuffling, people leaving, muffled voices in the distance. What the heck? Again? By now I was starting to get worried. Why would people be coming and going so quickly when the place only takes reservations for longer than a week? At the least. The next morning I pondered it, once again not saying a word to my wife about it, my worry growing. Could something paranormal be going on here? I've never been an avid believer in ghost stories and horror movies, merely believing them to be nothing more than entertainment. I wrote it off as just people being pricks at first, thinking it would end. It did not. More nights passed, and every night someone was taken. One by one the rooms were emptied, the place quickly becoming vacant. What was worse was that the staff were growing more and more mysterious. I couldn't stop my worry. 10 days passed, and every night someone was taken. It never stopped, and by the time night 24 rolled around, we soon learned why people were disappearing. On the 24th night, we were the only ones left in the inn. My questions, combined with my restlessness, put worry in my wife's heart. I tried speaking with anyone to find out what was going on. None of the staff replied. It was almost as if I was not even there to them. They remained silent as statues, going on about work as if we never existed. I had tried canceling the trip, but none of the staff would respond to us. See, this inn trip can only be canceled by signing out through the inn's manager, who was nowhere to be found. Perhaps he was busy elsewhere. But no, this is his job. He's supposed to be here at all times during the weekdays. If we tried to leave without consulting the manager, then the contract we signed to take this trip would be revoked and give them the right to take us to court. I was stupid to believe it would all be fine. That night we slept like rocks, but soon I heard rustling down the aisle. Perhaps my wife had got up to get a drink. I sleepily looked over, my eyes still heavy and crusty from sleeping, to see her beside me still, sound asleep. I shrugged, assuming it was the staff team, perhaps cleaning the aisles, and trying to remain positive about things no matter how mysterious the circumstances were. I heard nothing from that point on, but by the time 2 a.m. rolled around, again, is where we learned the truth. The door was slammed open quick as a flash, startling me and my wife awake. But we didn't have time to react as 2 black figures had rags with chloroform on them and pressed them against both our faces. I struggled with all my might to be let go, but soon passed out. Their speed was so fast it was inhuman. I woke hours later to find me and my wife were both tied up inside a massive cage. We weren't the only ones in the cage. We saw the others whom we thought left, but we were kidnapped. I looked around, and they were all beyond scared, their eyes wide, some crying and some struggling and screaming, begging to be let go. I had never been so terrified in all my life. I felt like a cornered animal at that very moment, and all I could do was give my wife something to lean on. She was terrified and bawling her eyes out. I felt the warmth of her tears trickling down my neck as she buried her face into it. I felt so many emotions: anger, terror, sadness, concern, helplessness.
Journal entry 2. Imprisonment and transportation.
The cage we were in, it was unlike any I had ever seen before. It looked alien in origin, completely different from any known material I had ever seen before. As a doctor, I know a lot about organic tissue. The cage itself was made out of something alive. Everyone else was unable to notice as they didn't know what to look for, but I saw what looked like pores and some skin-like wrinkles. The texture was slippery and smooth to the touch. I couldn't fully grasp what it was, but it felt like an octopus. Outside the cage looked like a large, conical room. From what I could tell, it looked as if we were inside a cone-shaped object with rounded off ends. It felt like we were moving, and I heard creaking sounds from the object as if something was pushing against it from the outside. Were we out at sea? I may enjoy going to the beach, but as far as being in the ocean, I despised the thought of being in a void of water to where I could not see the bottom. Could we have been in a submarine? My mind hoped so. To my horror, the seasick feeling rolling around in my gut told me otherwise. I looked at the walls of the large cone-shaped object we were inside, and I grimaced at the sight I saw. From the minimal lights in the structure combined with my squinting, I could make out what looked like veins pumping blood all around in many different directions. The color of the thing appeared to be that of deep green, almost black like seaweed. My eyes looked up and I nearly threw up with what I saw. Tendrils were swishing around in the ceiling, and they were pinkish in coloration. The scary part, however, was the fact they were covered from tip to tip in barbs, and I saw one as clear as day moving down to a cage in the center of the room. I heard echoing screams of terror as the tendril reached into a cage and slammed tight around a person. The voice sounded like a woman, and another, a man. I saw blood shoot out from the puncture marks of the barbs, and I looked away, throwing up violently. As soon as I recomposed myself, I dared to look back, trying to control the intense feeling of horror and helplessness in me, but I couldn't. The tendril squeezed the woman like an anaconda. I heard bones cracking under the immense force as the tendril then rapidly retreated into the darkness above us. A massive mouth opened up at the top, revealing huge teeth, and a nearly endless pit upwards as the tendril threw the corpse of the woman up and proceeded to eat it. I started losing it. I banged on the cage with all my might, screaming, begging to be released from this hell, but it was useless. I recoiled and broke down into tears. I could feel my wife trying to comfort me, near losing it herself as I remembered grasping her and hugging her tight. I felt her tears hit my skin once again. It felt awful. We didn't deserve this, but it was happening. I looked up, trying to find out more about the place, and I saw far more cages than I did originally, my eyes stressing hard against the dark. There must have been at least 100 cages in this large, living organism, each one housing around 50 people each. It was now evident to me that there was thousands of people trapped in this creature, but woe unto us. It was only just starting. More and more people in the center of the room were being eaten, presumably to keep the transport creature sustained, while the rest of us were being moved somewhere. I had no idea where we were anymore. I tried looking at my phone, but got no signal. We were far from civilization, and I couldn't control my body or my tears. So many people were trying to break the cages to no avail. Some were even trying to scale them. It was a horrific sight to behold, and the only solace I and my wife had was that our family was safe. I looked up once again and noticed a dim shade of yellow in several places. They looked like glowing sacks of pulsating goo and organs that illuminated most of the top of the structure. I remember looking to my wife at that moment, knowing we would likely not be long for this world. As her eyes met mine, I couldn't help but grasp her hands, trying to assure her that we would be okay. that all of this was just some horrible prank and nothing bad was happening. It was hopeless. The reality of our situation soon set in stone, and I could feel everyone around us come to acceptance with their fate. As over time, the screaming stopped. People had begun to lose the will to struggle against it. Tendrils picked the ones in the central part of the room off one by one, until only a handful were left. I held my wife, at least somewhat happy she was beside me. Even if we did die there, we'd be in each other's arms, like many couples in the past, holding hands till death do them part. I could hear the whimpering and crying from wives here and there, or even the banging on the cages by a few male inmates. Soon, however, something shifted, and everyone felt it. The creature stopped abruptly. But why? We soon realized why. Doors began to open with organic gurgling sound, 4 of them at different sections of the room. I saw what looked like humanoids, but unlike anything I ever saw before. Their bodies were made up of a combination of chitin and tendrils, their eyes elevated up on stalks, and as alien looked as one could imagine. Their hands looked like lobster claws, and their feet were nothing more than tendril-like appendages they used to slide along the floor. Their mouths were circular with jagged, serrated teeth. It looked as if they simply tossed food in, and their teeth grinding it up before swallowing. A twisted sight indeed. I heard more gurgling noises like a door to our cage opened. I felt a very painful stinging sensation on my back as I cried out in pain, turning around to see one of the creatures demanding us to get up in a language I didn't understand. We were soon rounded up like cattle and forced to walk in an orderly line out of the cage. The creatures appeared armed with tendrils, used to whip disobeying slaves into submission, to do as they told, and at certain times, both me and my wife felt them. It felt like pins and needles tearing at my flesh, as blood trickled down the wounds. We exited the conical-shaped living prison, and my eyes widened. We were indeed in the ocean, and it was so dark outside, I couldn't see a thing. We were in a tomb made of what looked like a form of glass, and once again a living, breathing entity. It looked like one of those walkways underwater you'd see in popular aquariums. I heard what sounded like a slow beating heartbeat down the aisle, as we were escorted by the alien-looking monsters. The aisles themselves appeared to stand 15 feet tall with yellow, glowing orbs of light, like before, all connecting to one central, massive dome at the center. From where I stood, it looked upwards of 25 miles wide from all 4 corners, like an alien dome housing a city made of flesh. It was all dark green with disgusting, wriggling creatures on them that I'd only describe in a horror film if I happened to be a director. But this was far from a film. It was real. Outside the domes, I saw massive glowing orbs being held in place by massive, moving tendrils that illuminated the entire sea in the region. I heard a low growling from the living structure as they towered like kaijus around us. As we reached the end of the tunnel, we saw the massive living city up close, with 10,000s or 100,000s of them, creatures as far as the eye could see. I didn't have enough time to take it in, as I felt my wife being pulled away from me. I looked, overhearing her screaming my name and crying as a creature tried to break us up, its strength winning over mine as I screamed out and cried back. 2 other creatures coming to restrain me as I tried to stop them from taking her. More creatures separated the other women from the men as they took her to a room I could not see into. Us men were moved elsewhere. We were led, most of us in tears and unable to fight back, down into what looked like a cavern. The creatures forced a form of pickaxe into our hands and forced us to start digging new areas down into the ground for what must have been breeding grounds for these things. We worked for what felt like hours before being allowed to leave to take a break, given a tiny dorm room to recuperate in. In the distance, I heard women screaming, and what sounded like clapping noises. My heart sank deep.
Journal entry 3. Tragedy.
I knew I had to escape somehow, but how would I? And how could I possibly get out of here with my wife without being noticed? I didn't even know entirely where my wife was. I had a rough idea of where she would be, but that's barely anything to go on. Well, on break, I looked around my cell. For some reason, they gave me everything needed to relax, but other than that, it was beyond depressing. The fact I was imprisoned miles beneath the waves in a place I never knew existed was haunting. I started remembering things my dad taught me. He's dead now, of course. but I am certainly glad I learned strategic things and combat abilities from him. As for my mom, she was also in the military as a computer hacker and communications officer. Between the two of them, I learned a lot. I was able to secretly fashion a lockpick out of things in the room, and during the nights, I would use what I made to sneak out and look around. The creatures slept like normal humans, and most slept in strange pods. The pods themselves were organic just like everything else, and very few things were made of metal or other alloys. My guess is certain organic tissue is very durable against the stress of the ocean. As far as technology goes, they seem to be just as advanced, if not more so, than us humans. On the first night, I simply walked around cautiously. The few guards that were stationed were pretty much unable to see well in the dark, so I could use that to my advantage. They took a liking to dark environments. Not only that, they didn't have eyes. They had sensory organs I could evade rather simply. While looking around, I wasn't able to find much of interest, so I ended up heading back to my room and pretending I did not escape. I didn't see any cameras or security recordings, so that wasn't an issue. I guess they wouldn't expect someone to be able to escape their confinement so easily. The next day, we were sent back to work, and by the time I got back, my muscles ached. But I couldn't stop. I needed to find a way to escape and possibly get as many out with me as I could, but above all else, I had to find my wife. The next night, I cautiously broke out of my cell again and explored some more. I was able to learn a lot about the anatomy of the buildings by observing them with my clinical teachings. As a doctor, you're supposed to know these things. The buildings may have been organic, but they still function like modern tech, showing a technological and biological connection. This would cause several breakthroughs for humanity as a whole, but I wouldn't be able to backward engineer such accomplishments in such a short period, nor did I even have the means to bring them back with me. On the same night, I learned that the creatures have smaller submarines lined up in an aisle that you crawl into. I was able to figure out how they worked, and over a week, I told everyone near me how to operate them. They all gave me their best wishes on discovering more. On the 8th day, my muscles felt like jelly and about to collapse, but I was driven by a deep desire for freedom and the will to escape. However, I learned something that still haunts my memories to this day. Upon leaving my cell on the 8th night, cautiously sneaking around and evading guards, I stumbled upon a room. It looked like a storage depot. Jackpot. I quietly broke into the room, and what I saw confused me. I saw a staircase leading down, so I followed it. This didn't make sense. With every additional step down, I questioned why a storage depot would have stairs only that go down and not have any sort of weapons, food, or supplies. When I reached the bottom, I saw a doorway that was entitled Hybrid Room 1. I paused briefly, questioning what that meant. As I entered the room, I almost vomited from the smell. It wasn't gross smelling, but it was very strong and salty in odor. The room itself had another door with a see-through window, and the smell was coming out of that door. Upon walking over, my heart dropped into my stomach. I saw several women, propped up with their lower halves in a spread eagle. None of them had any clothes on from the looks of it. I quietly entered, and I saw they had been using our wives as reproductive pigs. I felt my heart breaking as I felt bad for them. Their cries in agony were awful, and it echoed into my eardrums endlessly. Every single one of them had oversized stomachs, blood everywhere, and some green substance on them. A green substance I didn't dare touch. I knew what it was. As I moved further down, I saw a number above the section which made my stomach curl. 24. It bloody said 24. I rushed over, and to my horror, I saw my wife. I broke down into tears heavily right there, and I felt my instinctive self rush over to lift her into my arms. She was barely awake, and all I could do was whimper her name. Adela, please, wake up. I saw her eyes slowly open, and she hugged me tight, crying as soon as she saw me. Jake, it hurts so much. They used us as... She whimpered out painfully, to which I shushed her. Save your energy, my love. I'll get you out of here. I swear to it. She smiled appreciatively, but then frowned. Hun, it's too late for me. Go save yourself. Get as many of the others out as you can, but I and the other women won't survive. A stutter screamed out. No, I won't leave you here. I can't. What would the kids think if I just left you here? My wife was unable to utter another word. She, as well as several other women, started to scream. I stepped back in pure horror as I watched her stomach shrink slowly, and out of her popped several creatures, each of them carrying loads of blood out with them. And as the last disgusting creature left her, she collapsed back onto the bed. The last shreds of life faded from her blue, marbles for her eyes. As they turned gray, in a rage, I killed every single one of the creatures they put inside her. I left not a one alive, and my eyes were soaked in green blood mixed with my wife's. I ran over to her and shook her, trying to wake her up. She was dead. Several tears streamed down my face as I cleaned off one of my hands and closed her eyes with 2 fingers. I kissed her deeply one last time while her lips were still warm, and held her one last time too. I swear to you, they will pay for this. In some way, I'll make them pay. Be at peace, loving wife, and an amazing mother. I struggled to let her go, but I knew I had to. I forcibly pulled myself away and cleaned up the mess I made, as to make things seem like they didn't survive the birth process. I then returned the doors to their places before I entered and quietly made my way back to my cell. Upon returning, I collapsed in the bed, bawling my eyes out. I opened my eyes, and I swear I saw the spirit of my wife staring back, smiling at me reassuringly that I'd be okay. Then as quickly as she appeared, she faded. I rolled over onto my bed and looked up at the ceiling. I felt a loneliness I had never known before in my life up until this point. It felt like a spear had been impaled into my heart, leaving a massive, gaping hole. That whole night, I did not sleep. My eyes stayed wide, and I stared directly at the ceiling, hoping that what I'd witnessed was no more than a horrible dream. But try as I might, there is no way what I had seen was just imagination. The only solace I had in me was that I would make them pay.
Journal entry 4.
My wife was dead. Nothing would change that. All I could do was swear to her I would make it out, and find some way to destroy them in the process. I already had a good head start, as I learned of several major infrastructures around the living city. So my goals were clear: inform the other inmates, tell them the plan, use the next night to stage a breakout, and run. There were certainly plenty of biological and technological mini-subs to do the job right, just enough for all 12 of us. The next night came quickly. Once I explained the plan to them, I quietly broke all of their cage locks and told them to get ready. I would stage the breakout and make it a clear beeline to the escape area. After that, I crouched down and made my way slowly through the curving tunnels and passageways. The whole trip took at least 20 minutes to reach my goal, the reactor core. Because of my tinkering, I learned that without it, the city would have no power, and without power, it would be nearly pitch black, but with just enough light. It could also be rigged to trigger an unstoppable 5-minute countdown to a self-destruct, which would send the city crashing down into the depths of the ocean, well below its crushed depth, and taking the foul creatures with it. As I made my way to the reactor core, I quickly overloaded every pump in the place, which would cause the water pumps to slowly overheat and overload, adding water to the inside in just under 15 minutes. After that, I flipped the main switches off and tore them out. This set off a blaring, alien-like alarm that rang through the city. A countdown started and I instantly bolted back for the exit, because I could run without fear of being heard, and I was quickly able to make my way back, but just by the skin of my teeth. By the time I made it back, several small explosions were bringing down buildings all inside the city. They shrieked in agony, further solidifying my suspicion of them being living entities rather than just buildings. As soon as I made it back, we split into groups. I and 3 others hopped into one mini sub-organism, while the other 8 hopped into 2 different ones. The controls were simple, no more complex than the average boat, as we threw the throttle into high gear, aiming for the surface as we shot up. Behind us, another massive explosion took place, which sank the city instantly. We heard an ear-piercing shriek as a massive tendril swung right in front of the mini-sub. I averted us away in the nick of time, but unfortunately, the 2 other mini-subs were destroyed. The tendril was huge, so massive I couldn't see the entire thing. The city wasn't at all a collection of several entities. It was one massive one. I was just glad we were getting away. Still, we paused for a moment to give prayers to the ones who had died, including our wives. After that, we got out of there. It had been almost 10 days since any of us saw the light of day, and finally, we saw it again. The beautiful blue sky above us, and no longer in permanent darkness. I set a course for Florida. I made sure to take us far away from the accursed inn where it all started, and as we finally ran aground on the uncharted beach, we all hopped out and took in the fresh, salty air. A sigh of relief came from us all, but every one of us was deeply depressed. We knew in our hearts we couldn't return to our families, lest they think us insane. We decided to build a small shack deep in the woods to live somewhat normal lives. We all worked together to make a life for ourselves. It was indeed hard, but we pulled through. Whereas our story could have ended, and I wouldn't be sitting here at this desk writing this in the hopes someone would find it. It didn't, and I was allowed to live to warn everyone of the threats we face from the deep. This is a warning to anyone who would seek out a new kind of adventure. I advise steering clear of low-price inns near the beach. They are not who they claim to be. Stay safe, and do not trust the ocean. To whoever finds this, I urge you to inform the public of these happenings. The last thing I want is for others to suffer the same fate I and my friends did. I know they'll try to find us, but it won't work out in your favor. We don't wish to be found. Just please heed our warning. End this nightmare once and for all. I shall leave the coordinates for the location of roughly where we were. The navigation computer on the still functioning mini-sub should prove useful.
December 16th, 2016. Further investigation shows a large crater off the coast of Florida, roughly 10 miles across. Corresponds heavily to the writings of Jake Rogers in his journal, entailing his story. Further investigations has been classified. Region considered a major hazard zone. All military personnel are set up to a permanent perimeter around the described location until deemed otherwise. Termination of investigation complete. Proceed with Task 2.